Hello, and welcome to Financial Clarity Live. This week, we're going to be tackling forecasting revenue. I want to introduce you to my guest, Phil Maffei, CFO at Sustain CFO, and Augie Manzella, our esteemed financial analyst at Sustain CFO. So, welcome to Financial Clarity Live. We're here today to transform the way that you think about your business finances. This isn't just a numbers game. It's about clarity, it's about strategy, and it's about taking control. So over the next 25 to 30 minutes, we're going to demystify the financial planning process, show you why FP&A matters, and help you see how it can unlock your business's true potential. Together, we're going to cut through the noise. We're going to focus on what matters, and we're going to arm you with the tools to make smarter and sharper decisions. All right, that's enough. Let's dive in. So, what most folks do is they look at their revenue, especially early in business, and they take some kind of rough shot at why it's going to continue in that direction, or they guess and they hope that it's going to go up and to the right. But today we're going to talk about how you can take a little bit more of an advanced approach to forecasting revenue. And Phil is going to be our expert talking about a bottoms-up drivers-based approach to that. So jumping right in. So Phil, looking at you, why revenue forecasting is so crucial. Obviously, it drives the business forward. Help us understand how you can anticipate opportunities, and we'll go start there.
Yeah, so your revenue forecasting is certainly the hardest P&L line item to forecast. It's the one the internal operations has the least control over. And what I mean by that is not that no one's doing anything, but there is some element of buyer behavior and market conditions that you're always going to be subject to. So it's because of that, it's most likely to be the least accurate. We've discussed in the past, right? Accuracy isn't our primary goal here, but ultimately, when it comes to anticipating opportunities, it needs to become a team effort, right? The finance department needs to be in lockstep with the sales department, understanding what opportunities are in the pipeline, what the prospects are looking like, and depending on sales cycles and things like that, we can start to develop a picture of what our potential outcomes could possibly look like.
Okay, great. So, that's the opportunity side, kind of the positive side of the coin. If you look at the negative side, mitigating risks, I guess, obviously you can't always forecast what's coming, but Augie, what role do you see data playing in building accurate or as accurate as possible revenue forecasts?
Data is definitely the backbone of forecasting. Things like historical trends, customer behavior, and insights about your particular market. They allow you to build a model that reflects reality and predicts future outcomes, as well as maintaining a level of flexibility.
That's right. Okay. Okay, let's talk about our three roles. In this case, I'm playing the CEO just of his, whatever companies we're talking about. We'll get to the other two roles, which are probably even more important. But the CEO's job is to provide the vision and obviously the systematic structure, accountability, and hierarchy in the organization that the business model is based off of. If the CEO is punch drunk on the sales forecast, that's probably what's going to play out downstream. But obviously, the counterweight to that is a lot of times the CFO seat. So, Phil, can you talk about the role that the CFO should play in revenue forecasting?
Well, I think in the overarching forecasting process, that's the domain of the CFO from a finance perspective, right? So it's the CFO's role to, pressure test assumptions, keep everybody honest. Oftentimes they're the one who's, I think the way you put it, right, the one who is not supposed to be drinking the Kool-Aid and trying to poke holes in the overly optimistic sales and executive team, which is often the case. So, I think that's the primary role is to, bring a level of, objective data and, finance lens to what can otherwise be a conversation around, pie in the sky, a lot of what ifs, but, ultimately holding folks' feet to the fire, making sure everyone stays accountable and understands the repercussions of, the various outcomes, that are a potentiality.
Fantastic. It's easy to say, tough to do, especially if you're outnumbered significantly in the room or you're coming in virtual and everybody else is in person just celebrating, whatever the win of the week was at the sales meeting. coffee and donuts. I guess, Augie, as you look at this and the building of the model, what role have you seen on the revenue side of the forecast is critical that you play, and how does that balance out with the other two roles?
I think from an analyst perspective, it's important to look under the hood every now and again and make sure that your tech stack is functioning properly, your data is being ushered from one platform to another in the way that you had anticipated, and to make sure all your output is in line and functional. So it's really a supporting role to the CFO and the CEO in terms of they more make the plan, and the analyst sort of engages that plan and acts on it.
Okay, got it. So we've got the players, we've got the seats figured out. Now come the challenges. We've talked about these a little bit, but obviously they become very real once you start to really try to build this out. And then once you're driving this forward every month and doing the variance analysis, biggest challenges I've seen as the CEO of organizations and working as the CFO, supporting the CEOs, tends to be over optimistic forecasts. We just got off a call with a client who dealt with that for a couple of years until we got involved and kind of grounded them in reality. So, Phil, what do you do when you're sitting there, the historical information behind you doesn't support what the head of sales and the CEO are saying is going to happen, and everybody's kind of quickly getting in line and lining up, maybe even cost structure around that? What do you do to hey, let's pump the brakes for a second and double check the optimism meter in the room?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we used to work with a guy who used to famously say, put it on a piece of paper, right? And make it real in the sense of, if you guys deliver on this, what does this look like? And what is it going to take to achieve these goals? And, I think there's an element of when you're running the process like we do properly, where there's a level of accountability and responsibility. So, you're less likely to provide an overly optimistic forecast if you are very rigorously held to that standard and, effectively held accountable to report on why it doesn't manifest itself, right? So the function of the CFO and the finance department is to, paint these outcomes as they've been laid out, and then plan the contingencies for, well, what if this doesn't happen? And then ultimately, right, it's not the finance team out there doing the selling. So when things do come in, in this particular case, behind what the forecast is, so long as the right people are held accountable, they're less likely to be, shooting for quite as optimistic of a forecast perhaps the next time around. So you don't want to balance this out, right? You don't want to discourage folks, but at the same time, you want to, I think, as you put it, it's still a level of realism in the conversation, and make sure it's grounded in data and in objective reality.
And then, the other piece is that there may be other items might come from the CRM, might, come from some other data source. And if you're either just starting out in this, or your organizational culture has not been as tight around discipline for tracking things, what is your suggestion, Augie, if there's clearly, a gap in historical data, but you need it to make an accurate forecast? How do you kind of throw at least a yield sign up and keep the conversation moving forward, but, point at the fact that there's a hole?
Well, for a newer startup client, we'll take a look at what market they're actually in, what industry they're actually doing business in. We'll get an idea of what some of the industry benchmarks are. This way, even if they're not around for that long, we can give a credible forecast.
Okay, that makes sense, right? So even in small privately held businesses, you're saying you can find, if you look hard enough, something industry based to go off of. Obviously, that might not have been the case 25 years ago, but the internet's a wonderful thing. Okay, so to overcome these forecasting challenges, right? If you have it, you want to make sure you're leveraging historical data. We do that every single month with our rolling forecast process. We've talked about that in prior episodes. It's critical here. But then these other two items here, incorporating market insights and then customer behavior, which might even include seasonality and stuff like that. Phil, how do you tie this into the forecasting process? So it's not a challenge, but an added benefit.
Yeah, I mean, so from a process perspective, and ultimately the tools you have in your toolbox to be able to achieve these goals, I think that the market insight is going to come from your sales team, the people who have the boots on the ground. And Augie alluded to a little earlier, right? You can leverage tools like CRMs, Salesforce and the like to organize your sales team around what they're seeing and identifying opportunities and using that objective data, right? So they're going to be closest to the market. The salespeople are going to be closest to the customers, and therefore their input in this process is critical to be able to, again, paint a picture of reality that's in line with the people who are on the front lines and what they're seeing and what they're expecting, and the folks who know the customers and know the markets that they're operating in. So leveraging those folks is critical, and there's certainly really good tools out there to be able to to do that. And we leverage CRMs all the time in our revenue forecasting process.
So I want to get to something that you mentioned, Phil, and I think it might be kind of the crux of why we exist as fractional CFOs. If you have all of these roles trying to be played by too few of people, you're going to confuse the heck out of your organization at a minimum, or you're going to start shaping and creating personality disorders. I'm not a psychologist, just for the record. But if you, the CEO, are trying to drive sales forward and you're trying to encourage folks to think big, act big, wake up every day, dial like a champion, coffees for closers, and then you got to check them on reality once a month and get them to tamper those, that's going to come across like you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. And what you're going to end up usually doing is creating like a fear of, well, which boss is showing up today? And people will usually, bow down to that guy that they are more afraid of. So I think as we look at this and we say, this is where a fractional CFO organization like our own or another one could fit in really well. We're not there every day in the corner office, but we, and therefore we don't cost as much, but we are able to come in when it's necessary on that monthly strategy meeting, on that monthly sales meeting, be an ear and not necessarily the leader of the conversation, but the driver of the process. And that allows for the, reality to play out, but the optimism to continue to flow. And then the other point of this, Phil, is like, if you got to play this role right, and it usually comes from experience, not just from being the no guy in the otherwise room of yes folks, because you need the information out of the sales team to sharpen the and refine the assumptions. And so if you've like made them feel like crap every time that they put a big sales number up and then don't hit it, they might not be as willing to share with you what's actually changing in the customer behavior. So I guess, Augie, any through line that you're seeing here that you've seen in the conversations since you're allowed to be a little bit quieter and a little bit more analytical in the meetings with the groups?
Yeah, from sort of an outsider perspective, it can be a little bit easier to see certain dynamics that might be bubbling and brewing under the surface and leading to faulty communication or sort of, pass the buck mentality. And
Yes.
by having everything very clear in nicely organized tables, it's really hard to argue with the data in that format. And we can be the bearer of that bad news when necessary.
Yes, we've done it lots. It's it's hard to put a smile on, but maybe that's not what we need to be bringing to the table. It's just the truth. Numbers don't lie, but they usually don't speak without a CFO in the room. So let's talk about building this process. We spent the first half of this session talking about why and how and who and all that. But now, like, if we're getting down to brass tacks and we're looking to actually take the first step, Phil, what is that first step in creating a reliable revenue forecast?
So the first step is to, organize your revenue forecast and collect the data in the way you want to see it, right? We see this all the time where go into somebody's instance of QuickBooks or whatever their ERP is, and they've got one revenue line, right? Maybe they sell a bunch of products or have a bunch of different lines of business. But the first step that we always take with our clients is to make sure that they're organizing their data correctly, so that when it comes time to glean information in a logical and organized way, we have a depth and breadth of data to work with, right? So this oftentimes takes time, and oftentimes takes a lot of retroactive cleanup to get some useful information. But when the data is being presented properly, it presents itself in a way that allows a lot better levels of insight and accountability, and ultimately, being able to use it to do forecasting. So step number one is really, organizing and making sure that the accounting team and the bookkeeping team are, inputting invoices, in the case of revenue, into the system in a way that allows us to glean all this information by customer, by location, by product, whatever it may be.
All right, awesome. I'm going to let you keep rolling with it since you're the pro here. Keep us going. Steps 2 through 5. How does this thing come to life?
So, all right. So, I guess model selection, I think Josh has alluded to, right? We take the bottoms up drivers based approach to the extent that we can. A lot of people can say, hey, my goal for next year is $10 million. Let me seasonalize it the same way it came in this year. And that's my revenue forecast, right? What we prefer to do is, look at things like pipelines and, looking at the balance sheet for any kind of deferred revenue and things that are going to impact the P&L. So to build this bottoms-up view of the world, right, we're trying to figure out how many salespeople do we have on the ground? What are their quotas? What can we expect them to achieve? So, depending on your business, as Augie was alluding to earlier, and the way that you conduct business will dictate, the way that we do this forecasting. Consulting business is going to forecast their revenue completely differently than a manufacturing business, who's going to forecast their revenue completely different from a multimedia online company or something like that. That step on this list is, the collaboration. So once you, as the CFO's role is to design this process and figure out all the data mappings and all that good stuff, and then ultimately communicate that with the team, and as we were alluding to earlier, enroll in the process that need to be enrolled in it in a way that everyone works in this collaborative environment, and no one's feeling attacked, but there's a level of balanced optimism and realism. As you collect the team, get everyone together, and you're running what we call our rolling forecast process, where you're in this world of getting together, analyzing all of the inputs into the process. So it's like we just alluded to earlier, a lot heavily relying on things like CRM. And then you're going to have the conversation to generate a forecast. You're going to do this a month in and a month out. And then last step here is doing all these things properly. Then you're in a place where you can analyze and interpret this data in a way that's going to enable you to make better decisions going forward, right? So it's an end-to-end process. If it's just a room doing it, it's not going to do anybody any good. If it's laid out properly and set up correctly, Jump Street, you're going to get to a world where you can forecast revenue in a way that's meaningful. And not necessarily, again, what we alluded to, doesn't need to be accurate, so long as the information you're deriving from the process enables the sales team to be more effective, the operations team to be more effective, managing cash flow better. All those good things come from a reliable process and building a reliable forecast.
And like you said, this process, really repeats, right? It's like it gets to step 5, and then you're shifting back. It might be a little easier month after month for, one, you might skip the model selection because you've got that in place, but you're going to repeat this process. So just to go over one more time for the folks out there trying to take notes, you're going to review existing data. You're going to identify, where key metrics are driving things forward. You're going to choose a forecasting tool, and you're going to develop a forecasting plan. These are, broad brush strokes. If you don't understand or you need help, this is where folks like us come in. Go ahead and book a call with CFO. You can find us on LinkedIn, and we can start, usually within a couple weeks, and usually have a forecasting process well in place with multiple iterations in 90 days. And that's where the clarity comes from. We're going to go to some folks out there in the audience asking some questions. So Maria, owner of a Fresh Start fitness business, says, our revenue projections have been off the mark recently. How can we improve accuracy? Looking at you, Phil, and then Augie, why don't you clean them up?
Well, like I said, understand, but exactly how the process is currently running, but always go to the if it's not working, you have to try something new. In a fitness business, in my mind, of all the revenue, kind of generation streams to predict it, it's, the function of how many memberships you have out there and how quickly you can sign people up, right? So you have an understanding of your capacity. What I always kind of tell folks is, figure out where the floors are, where the ceiling is, what's the break even number and how much revenue do you need to generate to operate the business and maintain at least a, positive cash flow or at least a break even. So, kind of looking at and revisiting all those things could be a good place to ground yourself in, what is my best case, worst case, what do I need to make happen? And then work from there in terms of looking at historical seasonality, right? I know everyone this time of the year is joining the gym, so you generally see a big surge in the beginning of the year, and then people get lazier, and then some of them wind up coming in and cutting themselves off. Someone who's done that myself, again, I've talked about this, right? There's a new law that's being passed where now people can, instead of having to go into gyms, be able to cancel the memberships online. You can be sure that the gym model of people just sitting around and never actually get around to it is that's going to change the ability to do it with a click of a mouse. So being aware of these sorts of things and figuring out what the impact is on your top line is, it's a caveat, like I said, it's certainly the toughest, part of your P&L forecast, no doubt about it. But if you're having issues, kind of going back to basics, figuring out what you can be doing better in terms of the data you're utilizing and how you're interpreting it.
All right, I'm gonna ask Augie this. So we got another question coming in from James. He's the CEO of Urban Tech Solutions. How do I account for unpredictable market shifts in my revenue forecast? So kind of some of the stuff Phil was just tapping into. What do you think, Augie?
Well, you can analyze what's going on in-house, but you can also leverage industry reports and analysis of your competitors to anticipate potential market disruptions. So you don't necessarily have to wait until it's too late. There's a lot of information in terms of based on what industry you're on, what you might encounter, and you can sort of create a contingency plan from the get-go.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we're trying to communicate to our clients is that it's not that we don't want them thinking about their financials. As a matter of fact, we definitely want them thinking about their financials, but doing it in a more structured way, potentially delegating more of those roles and responsibilities to the rest of the team, allowing for that process to happen, and then refilling that time in that they were spending, probably in a pretty inefficient way thinking about financials and doing it to read industry reports, right? First thing in the morning, last thing at night, whatever it ends up working in their schedule. But that's where only the CEO is going to be able to make slight alterations to their vision based on information about their industry in a small business environment. That's the person that needs to do it. But if they can't find the time or they can't find the motivation, that's where things get stagnant and businesses ultimately tend to die in that situation. So key takeaways from today, we're going to encourage the audience to focus on growth strategies. Revenue forecasting is how you're going to manage and measure that. But do that with a level of realism in place. The CFO and a rolling forecast revenue forecasting process can create that environment. Remain aware of the market, right? Whether that be the broader market, your specific industry, or what's going on in your local market that's impacting your business. And then the last one is making decisions based on data. And obviously that data has to be relatively accurate to allow for you to make those decisions, and it's got to be timely. So with that being said, I want to thank everyone for participating in this. I want to thank my guests, Phil and Augie, for joining me. Go ahead and join our newsletter, Finance in 5, for weekly financial tips, updates, and questions and answers from this episode. We're going to see everybody next week, February 5th at 3 p.m. for our next episode of Financial Clarity Live. We're going to be talking about the other side of the books, which would be the expense forecasting. So we look forward to getting into that in the near future. I want to thank everybody out there and have a great day.